Nathan Powell wanted to destroy his ex-wife one last time by inviting her to his mansion wedding. He expected Eleanor Hayes to show up broken, childless, and humiliated. But when a midnight blue Maybach pulled up to his estate, and Eleanor stepped out in a champagne gown with twin toddlers in designer clothes and Steve Forbes, the richest man in town, holding her hand, the entire wedding party froze. The woman he called defective had become untouchable, and that was just the beginning. Once upon a time in the rain-soaked city of Seattle, there lived a man named Nathan Powell. He was a tech entrepreneur in his early 40s, the kind of man who measured his worth in quarterly earnings and the envy in other men's eyes. Everyone in the business circles knew him as sharp, ambitious, and ruthless when necessary. Nathan wore Italian suits like armor, drove cars that cost more than most people's houses, and walked through rooms as if gravity worked differently for him than it did for ordinary people. He was proud. He was driven. And he believed deeply that success was something you built with the right components, the right education, the right investments, the right connections, and most importantly, the right wife. But behind the executive office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, behind the penthouse with its minimalist furniture and original Rothko on the wall, there was a crack in Nathan Powell's perfect life. A crack that grew wider every month, every year, until it finally split his world in half. His wife, Eleanor, couldn't give him children. Eleanor Hayes Powell was a woman of quiet elegance. She had smooth brown skin that seemed to glow from within, expressive dark eyes that carried both warmth and an unspoken sadness, and a gentle voice that never rose even when she had every reason to scream. She had married Nathan 8 years ago, not for his money, though he had plenty of it, but because she believed in the man she thought he was. The man who quoted poetry on their third date. The man who cried at his grandfather's funeral. The man who promised her that they would build something beautiful together. For 8 years, Eleanor stood beside Nathan Powell. She decorated the cold penthouse until it felt like a home. She attended every business dinner, every charity gala, every networking event, playing the role of the perfect wife with grace. She learned which wines his clients preferred, which topics to avoid with his mother, which jokes would make the room laugh without making Nathan feel upstaged. But those 8 years slowly became years of quiet agony, because every month, Eleanor waited. And every month, the answer was the same: no baby. One evening, the storm that had been building in their marriage for years finally broke. The Seattle rain hammered against the penthouse windows, turning the city lights below into blurred streaks of gold and red. The air inside their bedroom was thick with tension, heavy with words that had been swallowed too many times. Eleanor sat on the edge of their California king bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had just come from the bathroom, holding another negative pregnancy test. She didn't even show it to Nathan anymore. There was no point. Nathan entered the bedroom, his tie already loosened, his Rolex catching the light. His jaw was set in that way Eleanor had come to recognize, the look he wore when he was about to say something that would hurt. 8 years, Eleanor, Nathan said, his voice cold and controlled. He didn't shout. Nathan Powell never shouted. He didn't need to. 8 years of trying. 8 years of doctor's appointments and tracking ovulation and expensive supplements. And we're still here, in the same place we started. Eleanor lifted her eyes slowly. Nathan, Dr. Reed said we should both get comprehensive testing. There might be something wrong with you, Nathan cut her off, setting his briefcase down with deliberate care. That's what he meant. Let's not dance around it. That's not what he said, Eleanor replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He suggested we both get tested. Both of us. It's standard procedure when... Nathan laughed, a short, bitter sound. You want me to get tested? Like I'm the problem? Eleanor, my family has a documented bloodline going back to the Mayflower. My grandfather had 6 children. My father had 4. There are Powells in every generation going back 200 years. The problem isn't the Powell genetics. Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap. Then what are you saying? Nathan turned to face her fully, his eyes hard. I'm saying that maybe we need to accept reality. Maybe this isn't going to happen, and maybe I need to consider what that means for my future." The words hung in the air like poison. Eleanor stood slowly, her body suddenly feeling too heavy. "What does that mean, Nathan?" "What are you trying to say?" He walked to the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the rain. "My mother called me today. Again, she asked when she should start planning a baby shower. I had to tell her again that there's nothing to plan. Do you know what that feels like? To disappoint your own mother month after month? Do you know what it feels like to disappoint your husband month after month?" Eleanor's voice finally cracked. "Do you think I want this? Do you think I go to bed happy every night knowing I can't give you what you want?" Nathan turned back to her, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been regret or sympathy, but it died quickly, replaced by something colder. "What I want," he said carefully, "is a family. What I want is to come home to more than just this." He gestured vaguely around the room. "I want children, Eleanor. I want to hear small feet running down these hallways. I want to teach someone to ride a bike, to throw a baseball. I want to leave something behind when I'm gone. Is that so terrible?" "No," Eleanor whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "It's not terrible. It's what I want too. Then why can't you give it to me?" The question landed like a slap. Eleanor stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. "You think I'm choosing this? You think I wake up every morning and decide not to get pregnant?" "I don't know what to think anymore," Nathan said, his voice rising for the first time. "All I know is that I'm 42 years old, Eleanor. I don't have unlimited time, and every year we waste." "Waste?" Eleanor's voice finally broke free. "Is that what our marriage is to you? A waste?" Nathan ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration he'd made 1,000 times. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" "I meant that maybe—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe we weren't meant to have children together. Maybe this is a sign." Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. A sign of what? That we made a mistake. The rain pounded harder against the windows. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed. A car horn echoed up from the street below. But inside that bedroom, there was only silence. Eleanor sank back onto the bed, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. "You want a divorce?" It wasn't a question. Nathan didn't answer immediately. He walked to his nightstand, opened the drawer, and pulled out a manila folder. He held it for a moment as if weighing it. Then he placed it on the bed beside her. Eleanor stared at the folder. She didn't need to open it to know what it contained. "I had my lawyer draw these up last week," Nathan said quietly. "I've been thinking about this for a while. I didn't want to hurt you, Eleanor. I really didn't. But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." Eleanor's hands trembled as she picked up the folder. Her vision blurred with tears, making the text swim on the page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Irreconcilable differences. "You already decided," she whispered. "You didn't even talk to me. You just decided." "What was there to talk about?" Nathan asked, his voice almost gentle now, which somehow made it worse. "Would you have suddenly become able to have children? Would talking about it have changed anything?" Eleanor looked up at him, mascara running down her face. "We made vows, Nathan. Before God, before our families. We promised for better or for worse, in sickness and in health." "And I kept those vows for 8 years, Nathan replied. 8 years, Eleanor. I think I've been patient enough." "Patient?" The word came out like broken glass. "You think marriage is about patience? About waiting for your wife to perform well enough to meet your standards? That's not fair." "Fair?" Eleanor stood up, the folder falling to the floor, papers scattering. "You want to talk about fair? I gave you everything, Nathan. I left my job to support your career. I moved across the country away from my family. I smiled at your mother when she made snide comments about my rural background. I pretended not to hear when your business partners made jokes about us being childless. And now, after all of that, You're telling me I'm not enough? Nathan's face hardened. Don't make this dramatic. I'm offering you a generous settlement. $200,000. That's more than enough to start over. Eleanor laughed, a horrible broken sound. You think this is about money? You think you can just write me a check and erase 8 years of my life? I think I can give you the dignity of a clean break instead of dragging this out for years, Nathan said coldly. I've already found an apartment for you, downtown, nice building. I'll cover the first 6 months of rent. You'll have time to figure out your next steps. Eleanor stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. You already found an apartment. You already talked to a lawyer. You already decided my entire future. And you're only telling me now? I was trying to make this easier. Easier for who? Eleanor's voice rose to a scream. Easier for you, Nathan. Everything is always about making things easier for you. The door to the bedroom suddenly opened. Patricia Powell, Nathan's mother, stood in the doorway. She was dressed in a cream Chanel suit despite the late hour, her silver hair perfectly styled, her expression carefully neutral. I heard shouting, Patricia said calmly, as if she hadn't just walked in on her son destroying his marriage. Is everything all right? Mother, this isn't a good time, Nathan said. Patricia stepped fully into the room, her eyes moving from Nathan to Eleanor and back again. She saw the scattered divorce papers on the floor, her lips pressed into a thin line. I see, she said quietly. So you finally told her? Eleanor's head snapped toward her mother-in-law. You knew? He told you before he told me? Patricia had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. Nathan consulted me about his options. As his mother, I felt I should support his decision to abandon his wife? Eleanor finished, her voice shaking with rage and grief. Tell me, Patricia, what happened to all those conversations we had about family values? About the sanctity of marriage? Or does that only apply when it's convenient? Patricia's expression cooled. Eleanor, dear, I understand you're upset, but you must see this from Nathan's perspective. He needs an heir. Every man does. And if you can't provide that, then what? Eleanor stepped toward her mother-in-law. Then I'm disposable? Then 8 years of loyalty and love mean nothing? It means we're grateful for your time, Patricia said, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she used when speaking to service workers. But we must think of the Powell legacy. Surely you understand that. Eleanor felt something inside her shatter completely. She looked at Nathan, who stood silent, letting his mother speak for him. She looked at Patricia, who gazed back with cold certainty. And she realized, with terrible clarity, that she had never been family to these people. She had been an experiment, a temporary placeholder. And now that the experiment had failed, she was being removed. I want you out by tomorrow morning, Nathan said, his voice flat. The apartment will be ready. I've already arranged for movers. Eleanor's laugh was hollow. You've thought of everything. I'm trying to be reasonable. Reasonable, Eleanor repeated softly. She bent down and picked up her wedding ring from where it sat on the nightstand. She held it for a moment, remembering the day Nathan had placed it on her finger, remembering his promises, his smile, the man she thought he was. Then she set it down on top of the divorce papers. I'll be gone by morning, she said quietly, but not because you're being reasonable, because I can't stay in this house for one more second. She walked to the closet and pulled out a suitcase. Her hands shook as she began pulling clothes from hangers, not bothering to fold them, just throwing them in. A dress Nathan had bought her for their anniversary. A blouse Patricia had said made her look almost elegant. A skirt she'd worn to a dozen business dinners where she'd smiled until her face ached. Nathan and Patricia watched in silence as Eleanor packed. Neither of them moved to help. Neither of them tried to stop her. When the suitcase was full, Eleanor zipped it closed and lifted it off the bed. She walked to the bedroom door, then paused. Nathan, she said without turning around. Yes? I hope you find what you're looking for. I really do, but I want you to know something. Now she turned, meeting his eyes one last time. You didn't break me. You just showed me who you really are. And one day, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but one day, you're going to realize what you lost. And by then, I'll be so far beyond you that you won't even be able to see me anymore." Nathan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Eleanor turned to Patricia. "And you, Patricia, I hope your precious Powell legacy brings you everything you deserve." She walked out of the bedroom, her suitcase wheels catching on the hardwood floor. She walked through the penthouse she had turned into a home, past the kitchen where she'd cooked countless dinners, past the living room where she'd arranged fresh flowers every week, past the piano she'd learned to play because Nathan mentioned once that he liked classical music. She walked past all of it without looking back. The elevator felt like it took forever to arrive. When the doors finally opened, Eleanor stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors began to close, she caught one last glimpse of the penthouse hallway, empty, cold, and sterile, just like the man she'd married. The rain had turned brutal by the time Eleanor stepped out onto the Seattle streets. Her thin jacket offered no protection against the wind that whipped through the downtown corridors, and within seconds, she was soaked. Her suitcase bumped awkwardly against her leg as she walked, its wheel catching on every crack in the sidewalk. She had no idea where she was going. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Probably Nathan, probably wanting to coordinate logistics like she was a piece of furniture being removed from his life. She ignored it. The city at night looked different when you were alone. The glittering high-rises that had once seemed exciting now loomed like tombstones. The cafes and restaurants full of laughing people felt like they existed in another dimension, one where Eleanor no longer had permission to enter. She walked for 6 blocks before her fingers were too numb to grip the suitcase handle anymore. She ducked under an awning outside a closed bookstore and pulled out her phone with shaking hands. There was only one person she could call. Jade Montgomery answered on the second ring. "Elle? Girl, it's almost midnight. What's wrong?" Eleanor opened her mouth to speak, but all that came out was a sob. "Where are you?" Jade's voice shifted immediately from sleepy to alert. "Eleanor, where are you right now?" "I don't," Eleanor's voice broke. "I don't know. Somewhere downtown. Near Pike Street, I think. Jade, he threw me out. He just—" "Stay right where you are," Jade commanded. "I'm coming to get you. Do not move. You hear me? Don't you dare move." 15 minutes later, a blue Honda pulled up to the curb, and Jade Montgomery burst out of the driver's side like an avenging angel. She was wearing pajama pants and an oversized Howard University sweatshirt, her natural hair wrapped in a silk scarf, and she had never looked more beautiful to Eleanor. "Oh, honey," Jade whispered, pulling Eleanor into her arms. "Oh, baby, what did he do to you?" Eleanor collapsed into her best friend's embrace and finally let herself cry. Not the quiet, dignified tears she'd shed in the penthouse. These were ugly, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest, from a place she'd kept locked and controlled for 8 long years. Jade held her tight, one hand rubbing circles on her back, murmuring the kinds of soothing nonsense words that only best friends can get away with. "It's okay. I've got you. You're safe now. I've got you." When Eleanor's sobs finally subsided into hiccups, Jade pulled back and looked at her friend's face. Mascara streaked, eyes swollen, lips trembling. "Let's get you home," Jade said softly, grabbing Eleanor's suitcase and guiding her toward the car. Jade's apartment was a cozy loft in Capitol Hill, full of mismatched furniture, vibrant African art, and plants that somehow thrived despite Jade's chaotic schedule running her boutique. It was warm. It was lived in. It was everything Nathan's sterile penthouse had never been. Jade settled Eleanor on the couch, wrapped her in a fuzzy blanket, and disappeared into the kitchen. She returned moments later with 2 mugs of tea and a box of tissues. "Drink," Jade ordered, pressing a mug into Eleanor's hands. "And then tell me everything." So Eleanor did. She told Jade about the divorce papers, about Nathan's cold calculation, about Patricia appearing like some designer-clad harbinger of doom, about the apartment Nathan had already arranged, as if Eleanor were a problem to be solved rather than a wife to be loved. With every word, Jade's expression grew darker. "That son of a—" Jade bit off the curse. 8 years. 8 years you gave that man, and he just throws you out like you're nothing? He said he's been patient enough, Eleanor whispered, staring into her tea. Like our marriage was some kind of endurance test he finally failed. Jade set her mug down with a sharp click. Did he ever get tested? Did Nathan Powell's precious genetics ever get examined to see if maybe, just maybe, he was part of the problem? Eleanor shook her head. He refused. Said it would be insulting. Said his family has been having children for 200 years, so obviously... Obviously nothing, Jade interrupted. Elle, you can't just assume. That's not how bodies work. That's not how anything works. Eleanor pulled the blanket tighter around herself. It doesn't matter now. He's already made his decision. No. Jade stood up abruptly. We're not doing this. We're not letting that man make you believe you're broken. Tomorrow morning, actually screw tomorrow, Monday morning, you and I are going to Dr. Reed's office, and you're getting a full fertility workup. Jade, I can't afford a... Did I ask if you could afford it? Jade's voice softened. Elle, you're my sister. You've been my sister since we were 18 years old, sharing a dorm room smaller than Nathan's closet. I've got money saved, and we're using it to get you some answers. End of discussion. Eleanor felt fresh tears spilling down her cheeks, but these were different. These came from gratitude rather than grief. I don't deserve you, she whispered. Jade sat back down and took Eleanor's hand. You deserve so much better than what that man gave you, and we're going to prove it. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like you weren't enough for someone, drop a comment below. You're not alone. And stick with me. Eleanor's story is about to take a turn that will leave you speechless. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay on Jade's pull-out couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else's apartment. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Nathan's face. Cold, distant, already moving on. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Against her better judgment, she picked it up. Nathan. The movers will arrive at the downtown apartment at 9 a.m. Monday. The address is 2150 Western Ave, Unit 804. Keys will be with the building manager. Bank transfer of the settlement will complete by Wednesday. No, how are you? No, I'm sorry. Just logistics. Eleanor was now a task on his to-do list. She typed and deleted 5 different responses before finally settling on, understood. She put the phone face down and pulled the blanket over her head, as if she could hide from the reality that her life had just imploded. Monday morning arrived too quickly. Eleanor woke to the smell of bacon and the sound of Jade singing loudly off-key in the kitchen. I made breakfast, Jade announced when Eleanor shuffled in, still wrapped in the blanket. And before you say you're not hungry, I don't care. You're eating. You need your strength for today. Today? Eleanor's brain was still foggy from a night of broken sleep. Dr. Reed's office, remember? I already called. We have an appointment at 11. Eleanor wanted to protest, to say she wasn't ready, to crawl back under the blanket and pretend the world didn't exist. But Jade's expression made it clear this wasn't optional. 2 hours later, they sat in the waiting room of Pacific Northwest fertility specialists. The walls were painted a soothing sage green, and soft classical music played from hidden speakers. Every other chair held a woman, some young, some older, all wearing the same expression of cautious hope. Eleanor felt like an imposter. These women were here because they wanted to have babies. Eleanor was here because... Why? Because her marriage had ended? Because she needed proof that she wasn't defective? Eleanor Hayes? A nurse with kind eyes appeared in the doorway. The examination took 2 hours. Blood draws, ultrasounds, questions about her medical history, her cycles, her lifestyle. Dr. Callum Reed was a soft-spoken man in his 50s with gentle hands and a patient demeanor that made Eleanor feel slightly less like a specimen under a microscope. We'll have your results in 3 business days, Reed explained as Eleanor got dressed. But I want you to know, and please hear me when I say this, fertility issues are almost never about blame. They're medical situations that require medical solutions. Whatever happens with these tests, it doesn't define your worth as a woman or as a person. Do you understand? Eleanor nodded, even though she didn't fully believe him. 3 days felt like 3 years. Eleanor moved into the apartment Nathan had arranged, a sterile one-bedroom with builder-grade everything and a view of a parking garage. She unpacked her 3 suitcases and realized how little she actually owned. Everything else had belonged to Nathan. The furniture, the art, the life they'd built. She had her clothes, her college degree in interior design that she hadn't used in 5 years, and 8 years of memories she wished she could erase. Jade came over every evening, bringing food and conversation and refusing to let Eleanor wallow. "You're going to get through this," Jade insisted. "And then you're going to thrive, trust me." On Thursday afternoon, Dr. Reed's office called. Eleanor's hands shook as she drove back to the clinic. Jade met her in the parking lot because of course she did. They walked in together, hand in hand, like they were facing down an enemy army rather than a manila folder full of test results. Dr. Reed smiled when they entered his office. "Please sit." Eleanor couldn't read his expression. Was that a good news smile or a bad news smile? Did doctors learn how to make their faces neutral? Or was she just so traumatized that she couldn't interpret basic human expressions anymore? "Ms. Hayes," Dr. Reed began, folding his hands on his desk. "I've reviewed all of your test results, blood work, hormone panels, ultrasounds, everything." Eleanor held her breath. "Your reproductive system is completely healthy," Dr. Reed said simply. "Your ovarian reserve is excellent for your age. Your fallopian tubes are clear. Your hormone levels are exactly where they should be. You're ovulating regularly. There is absolutely nothing wrong with your fertility." The words hit Eleanor like a physical force. "Nothing?" "Nothing," Dorit repeated firmly. "In fact, I would say you're an excellent candidate for conception. If you were trying to get pregnant with a partner whose fertility was also normal, I would expect you to conceive within 6 months to a year." Jade let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I knew it. I knew that man was full of—" "But I didn't get pregnant," Eleanor interrupted, her voice hollow. "For 8 years, I didn't get pregnant." Dr. Reed's expression gentled, which suggests that the issue likely lay elsewhere. In cases where a woman's fertility is normal but conception doesn't occur, we would typically recommend that the male partner undergo testing as well. "He refused," Eleanor whispered. "That's unfortunately common," Dr. Reed said. "Male factor infertility carries a stigma that it shouldn't. But statistically speaking, in about 40% of infertility cases, male factors are either the sole cause or a contributing factor. Another 40% are female factors. The remaining 20% are unexplained or a combination of issues." Eleanor stared at the test results in her hands, at the numbers and medical terminology that translated to one simple truth. She wasn't broken. She wasn't broken. 8 years of blame. 8 years of feeling defective. 8 years of watching Nathan's disappointment grow into resentment and finally into cold dismissal. And she hadn't been the problem at all. "Ms. Hayes?" Dr. Reed's voice pulled her back. "Are you all right?" "I don't," Eleanor's voice cracked. "I lost my marriage over this. He threw me away because he thought I was defective, and I wasn't. I was never." She couldn't finish. The tears came too fast, too hard. Jade wrapped her arms around her, and this time Eleanor's sobs weren't from grief. They were from rage. Outside the clinic, Eleanor stood in the parking lot, breathing hard, her hands clenched into fists. "That son of a bitch," she said quietly. "Damn right," Jade agreed. "He never checked himself. He just assumed. He ruined our marriage based on an assumption." "Men like Nathan don't check themselves," Jade said. "They're too busy being right." Eleanor looked at her best friend. "I wasted 8 years of my life." "No," Jade grabbed Eleanor's shoulders. "You didn't waste anything. You learned, you survived, and now you're free." "Free," Eleanor repeated, tasting the word. It felt foreign in her mouth. "Free," Jade confirmed. "And Elle? The best revenge isn't anger. It's living well. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to build you a life so good that Nathan Powell looks back one day and realizes he threw away a diamond because he thought it was glass." Eleanor wiped her eyes and straightened her spine. For the first time in weeks, she felt something other than pain. She felt fury. And fury, she was beginning to realize, was a far better fuel than grief. 6 months after the divorce, Eleanor Hayes stood in front of a floor-length mirror in Jade's boutique, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. She had lost 15 pounds, not from trying, but from the way grief had stolen her appetite in those first brutal weeks. But now, those same bones that had felt fragile were draped in muscle earned from early morning runs along the waterfront. Her skin glowed with the kind of radiance that came from finally sleeping through the night. Her hair, which she'd kept in a conservative bob for years because Nathan preferred it that way, now fell in natural curls past her shoulders. "You look like yourself again," Jade said softly, adjusting the collar of the cream blazer Eleanor was trying on. "Actually, no, you look better than yourself. You look free." Eleanor turned, examining her reflection from different angles. The woman in the mirror stood taller, smiled easier, breathed deeper. "I feel different," Eleanor admitted. "Lighter, maybe. Like I've been carrying something heavy for so long that I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight." "That's called shedding dead weight," Jade said with a grin, "also known as Nathan Powell." Eleanor laughed, a real, full laugh that still surprised her when it happened. 6 months ago, she wasn't sure she'd ever laugh again. Now it came easier each day. The divorce had been finalized quickly. Nathan's lawyers were efficient, if nothing else. Eleanor had taken the settlement, $200,000 that felt like blood money, and done something Nathan would have called foolish. She'd invested it in herself. First, she'd rented a small studio space in Pioneer Square and hung out a shingle. Eleanor Hayes Interiors. Her interior design degree, dormant for 8 years while she played the role of executive wife, was dusted off and put to use. She started small. A friend of Jade's needed help with a coffee shop renovation. Then a neighbor wanted their condo redesigned. Then a local boutique hotel noticed her work and asked for a consultation. Word spread the way it does in Seattle's tight-knit creative community. Eleanor Hayes had an eye for transforming spaces. She understood how light moved through a room, how color could shift a mood, how furniture could either welcome or intimidate. More than that, she listened. Really listened to what her clients wanted, not what she thought they should want. Within 4 months, she had a waiting list. "You're late for your 2 o'clock, Jade reminded her, checking her watch. "Aren't you meeting with that big hotel chain today?" Eleanor's stomach fluttered with nerves. Cascade Luxury Hotels. They want to discuss a full redesign of their flagship property downtown. "Jade, if I get this contract..." "When you get this contract," Jade corrected. "When I get this contract, it'll change everything. This isn't some small boutique project. This is a 100-room hotel with a restaurant, bar, spa, and conference facilities. This is the kind of job that makes careers." Jade straightened Eleanor's collar one final time. "Then you better get going. And Elle, don't forget, you're not begging for this job. You're offering them the privilege of working with the best designer in Seattle." Eleanor grabbed her portfolio and headed for the door, then paused. "Jade?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for everything, for saving me that night in the rain, for forcing me to get tested, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Jade's eyes went suspiciously bright. "Girl, if you make me cry and ruin my makeup right before my afternoon appointments, I swear..." Eleanor laughed and left before they both started crying. Cascade Luxury Hotels had their corporate headquarters in the Columbia Center, the tallest building in Seattle. Eleanor rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, her portfolio clutched to her chest, trying to remember all the confidence Jade had just poured into her. The receptionist, a young man with perfect hair and a practiced smile, checked her in. "Ms. Hayes, they're running about 15 minutes behind. You can wait in the conference room if you'd like. Help yourself to water or coffee." The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Eleanor stood at the glass, watching ferries cut white lines across the blue-gray water, and tried not to think about how the last time she'd had a view like this, she'd been crying in Nathan's penthouse. That life felt like it had happened to someone else. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Eleanor turned. A man stood in the doorway, tall, probably mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair that was mostly silver at the temples. He wore a charcoal suit that was expensive but not showy, and when he smiled, it reached his eyes in a way that suggested he smiled often and meant it. It never gets old, Eleanor said. I've lived in Seattle for almost a decade, and I still stop to look at the water. Then you're doing it right, the man said, walking into the room and extending his hand. Steve Forbes. I own Cascade Hotels. Eleanor's heart jumped into her throat. Steve Forbes. The Steve Forbes. She'd researched the company, of course, but she'd expected to meet with a design committee or a project manager, not the owner himself. Eleanor Hayes, she managed, shaking his hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive, and his hand was warm. I wasn't expecting to meet with you directly. I'm honored. I like to be involved in major projects, Steve said, gesturing for her to sit at the conference table, especially when someone's portfolio is as impressive as yours. He opened a folder. Her portfolio, she realized. The digital version she'd submitted with her proposal. He'd printed out several of her projects and marked them up with notes. This coffee shop in Fremont, Steve said, pointing to one of her early projects. You completely transformed the space, but you kept the original exposed brick and the vintage light fixtures. Why? Eleanor relaxed slightly. This was a language she spoke fluently. Because the space had history. The building was 100 years old, and that brick had character you can't replicate. My job wasn't to erase what came before. It was to honor it while making it functional for what comes next. Steve looked up at her, something shifting in his expression. Honor the past while making it functional for the future. I like that. Most designers want to rip everything out and start fresh. Some spaces need that, Eleanor acknowledged. But this one didn't. Sometimes the foundation is solid, and all you need to do is build on it properly. They talked for an hour. Steve asked about her design philosophy, her approach to client relationships, her thoughts on sustainability and local sourcing. He didn't just ask surface questions, he dug deeper, genuinely curious, actually listening to her answers. Eleanor forgot to be nervous. This was what she loved about design. The way form and function danced together. The way a space could make people feel safe or inspired or welcomed. When she finished presenting her vision for the hotel redesign, Steve sat back in his chair, a small smile playing at his lips. Ms. Hayes, I've met with 6 designers in the past 2 months. You're the first one who made me excited about this project instead of anxious about the budget. Eleanor's breath caught. Does that mean? It means I'd like to offer you the contract, Steve said, pending the usual legal review and negotiations, of course. But yes, I want you to redesign our flagship hotel. Eleanor felt dizzy with joy and relief and something else. Pride, pure, uncomplicated pride in her own abilities. Thank you. You won't regret this, Mr. Forbes. Steve, he corrected. And I already know I won't. Your work speaks for itself. He stood and offered his hand again. Welcome to the Cascade family, Eleanor. As they shook hands, Eleanor caught herself noticing details she hadn't before. The way Steve's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The silver wedding band on his left hand. No, wait. She looked again. No ring, just a faint tan line where one used to be. She pushed the thought away immediately. This was business. This was her career. She wasn't here to notice whether her new client had kind eyes or a warm smile or… Stop it, Eleanor, she told herself firmly. Over the next 3 months, Eleanor threw herself into the hotel project with an intensity that both thrilled and exhausted her. She was at the site by 7 most mornings, meeting with contractors, examining fabric samples, adjusting lighting plans. She ate lunch at her drafting table and often worked until the cleaning crew arrived at night. Jade worried she was working too hard. Eleanor knew she was probably right. But there was something healing about pouring all her energy into creation instead of grief. Every room she designed, every color she chose, every piece of furniture she selected felt like proof that she was more than Nathan Powell's discarded wife. She was Eleanor Hayes, and she was building something beautiful. Steve Forbes appeared at the site more often than Eleanor expected. Not in a hovering, micromanaging way. He trusted her decisions and rarely overruled her choices. But he seemed genuinely interested in the process, asking questions about why she'd chosen certain materials or how she'd solved specific spatial challenges. Sometimes they'd end up talking for an hour, their conversations drifting from design philosophy to their favorite Seattle restaurants to books they'd read recently. Steve had a dry sense of humor that caught Eleanor off guard and made her laugh unexpectedly. He quoted poetry occasionally, T.S. Eliot and Maya Angelou and Rumi, and somehow made it sound natural rather than pretentious. One evening, as they stood in what would soon be the hotel's redesigned lobby, Steve suddenly said, "Can I ask you something personal?" Eleanor's guard went up immediately. "That depends on the question." "Fair enough." Steve looked at her carefully. "You work like someone who's trying to outrun something. I recognize it because I used to do the same thing. Are you okay?" Eleanor considered deflecting. She could laugh it off, change the subject, maintain professional distance, but something about the gentleness in Steve's voice made her honest. "I got divorced about 9 months ago," she said quietly. "It was not kind, and I think you're right. I think I'm trying to outrun it, or maybe prove something. I'm not sure which." Steve nodded slowly. "I was married once. She died, cancer. It's been 5 years, and I still catch myself working 16-hour days because going home to an empty house is harder than staying at the office." Eleanor looked at him with new eyes. "I'm sorry, I can't imagine." "It was the worst thing that ever happened to me," Steve said simply. "But it taught me something important. Time doesn't heal wounds, not by itself. You have to actively choose to heal. Otherwise, you're just waiting for the pain to become background noise." "And have you," Eleanor asked, "chosen to heal?" Steve smiled sadly. "I'm working on it. Some days are better than others." He looked around the unfinished lobby. "This helps, actually. Creating something new. Building something that wasn't there before. It reminds me that life isn't just about what you lose. It's also about what you choose to build in the empty spaces." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. "That's beautiful." "I stole it from a grief counselor," Steve admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. "But it's true." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who'd both learned that beautiful things could grow in the ruins of broken lives. "Eleanor," Steve said finally, "would you have dinner with me? Not about the hotel, just dinner. As two people who could both probably use some company that isn't work-related." Eleanor's first instinct was to say no, to keep things professional, to protect herself from the possibility of being hurt again. But then she looked at Steve, really looked at him, at the kindness in his face, the vulnerability he'd just shown her, the way he'd somehow created a space where she felt safe being honest. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that. Guys, drop a yes, Eleanor, in the comments if you're feeling this shift in her story. And don't go anywhere. What happens next is going to have you screaming." Their first dinner was at a small Italian restaurant in Belltown, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and Chianti bottles holding candles. It was unpretentious and warm, and Eleanor felt herself relaxing for the first time in months. Steve asked about her background, where she grew up, a small town in Georgia that most people had never heard of. What made her want to be a designer? Her grandmother's house, which was full of mismatched furniture that somehow worked perfectly together. How she ended up in Seattle, following a man, she admitted, though she didn't say which man or how that had ended. In turn, Eleanor learned that Steve had built his hotel empire from nothing. His parents had owned a small bed and breakfast in Oregon. He'd worked there as a teenager, learning every aspect of hospitality from making beds to managing bookings to fixing broken toilets at 2 in the morning. "I bought my first property when I was 26, Steve said, twirling pasta onto his fork. "It was a completely rundown motel outside Portland. Everyone said I was crazy. The place had a reputation as, well, not the kind of establishment you bring your family to." Eleanor laughed. "How bad was it?" "Let's just say the police knew the address by heart." Steve grinned. "But I saw potential. It had good bones, great location right off the highway, solid structure, just needed someone to care about it. So I bought it, spent a year renovating it myself, and turned it into a respectable budget hotel. Sold it 3 years later for triple what I paid. And the rest is history?" "The rest is a lot of mistakes, a few lucky breaks, and more sleepless nights than I care to count," Steve said. "Back out, bet that." "But yeah, 20 years later, here we are. 15 properties across the Pacific Northwest, and the best designer in Seattle making my flagship hotel beautiful." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You're very generous with compliments." "I'm very honest with facts," Steve corrected. "There's a difference." They talked until the restaurant staff started stacking chairs on empty tables. Steve insisted on walking Eleanor to her car, even though it was only a block away. "I had a really good time tonight," Eleanor said, meaning it. "So did I." Steve hesitated, then added, "Would you want to do this again? Maybe not wait another 3 months between actual non-work conversations?" Eleanor surprised herself by saying yes immediately. One dinner became 2, then 3, then regular Sunday brunches at Pike Place Market where they'd wander through the stalls and argue about which vendor had the best coffee. Steve never pushed for more than Eleanor was ready to give. He didn't ask about her ex-husband, didn't try to fix her or save her. He just showed up. Consistently, kindly. He made her laugh. He listened when she talked. He remembered small things she mentioned in passing, that she loved peonies, that she'd always wanted to learn to sail, that she missed her grandmother's peach cobbler. One Sunday, 3 months after their first dinner, Steve picked Eleanor up not for brunch, but for a surprise. "Where are we going?" Eleanor asked as they drove north out of the city. "You'll see," Steve said mysteriously. An hour later, they pulled up to a small marina. A sailboat bobbed in the water, white sails furled, waiting. Eleanor stared. "You remembered. You said you wanted to learn to sail," Steve said simply. "So I'm teaching you." It was one of the most perfect days of Eleanor's life. Steve was a patient teacher, showing her how to read the wind, how to trim the sails, how to feel the boat respond to tiny adjustments. They sailed out into Puget Sound, the Seattle skyline growing smaller behind them, and for hours, Eleanor thought about nothing except the wind and the water and the man beside her who'd somehow made her feel like herself again. When they docked as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Steve turned to Eleanor. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Of course." "I wasn't looking for this," Steve said quietly. "After Rebecca died, I told myself I was done, that I'd had my great love, and that was enough for one lifetime. But then I met you, and—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Eleanor, you make me want to try again, not to replace what I had, but to build something new, something that's ours." Eleanor's heart was pounding. "Steve, I'm scared. My marriage ended less than a year ago, and I'm still figuring out who I am without it. I don't know if I'm ready for—" "I'm not asking you to be ready," Steve interrupted gently. "I'm just asking you to be open to the possibility. We can go as slow as you need. I'm not going anywhere." Eleanor looked at this man who'd somehow slipped past all her defenses, not by force, but by consistently showing up as exactly who he was. Kind, patient, real. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, let's try." Steve's smile could have lit up the darkening sky. They married quietly 6 months later, on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. No big ceremony, no hundreds of guests. Just Jade as Eleanor's witness, Tobias Grant, Steve's oldest friend and business partner, as Steve's, and an officiant who spoke about love as a choice made every day, not just once. Eleanor wore a simple cream dress and carried peonies. Steve cried when she walked toward him. Jade cried. Even Tobias, who prided himself on being stoic, had to wipe his eyes. "I promise to choose you every day," Steve said when it was time for vows, "in the easy moments and the hard ones, when you're strong and when you need to be held. I promise to build a life with you where you never doubt that you're loved exactly as you are." Eleanor's voice shook when she replied, "I promise to let you in even when I'm scared, to trust that love doesn't have to hurt, to build something beautiful with you in all the empty spaces." When they kissed, the sun broke through the clouds like a blessing. Their honeymoon was 2 weeks in Italy, Rome, Florence, the Amalfi Coast. Steve showed Eleanor how to truly rest, how to wander without a schedule, how to drink wine at lunch and take naps in the afternoon and make love like they had all the time in the world. Because they did. For the first time in her adult life, Eleanor wasn't performing for anyone. Wasn't trying to be perfect enough, thin enough, quiet enough, convenient enough. Steve loved her messy morning hair and her loud laugh, and the way she cried at beautiful architecture. He loved her. Period. No conditions attached. 2 months after they returned from Italy, Eleanor woke up feeling strange. Her breasts were tender. Food she normally loved tasted wrong. She was exhausted all the time, falling asleep on the couch at 8 p.m. like an old woman. "Maybe you're catching something," Steve suggested, worried. "You've been working hard on the Cascade project. Your body might be telling you to slow down." But Eleanor knew her body, and a small, terrifying hope was beginning to bloom in her chest. She waited until Steve left for a meeting, then drove to a drugstore 3 neighborhoods away where no one would recognize her. She bought 4 different pregnancy tests, because if she was going to do this, she was going to be sure. Back home, locked in the bathroom, Eleanor took the first test, then the second, then the third and fourth, because her hands were shaking too hard to trust her eyes. All 4 tests showed the same result: pregnant. Eleanor slid down the bathroom wall until she was sitting on the cold tile floor, staring at the 4 plastic sticks lined up on the counter like tiny heralds of impossible news. She was pregnant. After 8 years of nothing with Nathan, after being told she was the problem, after internalizing the belief that her body was defective, she was pregnant. With Steve's baby, after only 4 months of marriage. Eleanor called Jade, barely able to form words through her tears. "Elle? What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "I'm pregnant," Eleanor sobbed. "Jade, I'm pregnant!" Jade screamed so loud that Eleanor had to pull the phone away from her ear. Oh my God, Eleanor, I'm coming over right now." "No, wait, I haven't told Steve yet. I don't even know how to—" "You tell him the truth," Jade said firmly. "That man is going to lose his entire mind with joy. Trust me." When Steve came home that evening, Eleanor was sitting on the couch, the 4 pregnancy tests arranged on the coffee table like an art installation. "Elle, I got your text to come home early. Is everything—" Steve stopped mid-sentence when he saw the tests. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes wide. "Are those—" Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. Steve crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands finding hers. "You're pregnant? We're having a baby?" "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "I know it's fast, and we didn't plan this, and I don't know if you're ready." Steve pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, tears were streaming down his face. "Ready?" He laughed through the tears. "Eleanor, I've been ready since the moment I met you. This is everything. You're everything." He kissed her softly, his hands cradling her face. "We're going to be parents." Eleanor started crying again, but this time from pure, uncomplicated joy. The first ultrasound was scheduled for when Eleanor was 8 weeks along. They sat in Dr. Reed's office, the same office where Eleanor had learned she wasn't broken, holding hands so tightly their fingers turned white. Dr. Reed applied the cold gel to Eleanor's stomach and moved the ultrasound wand slowly, searching. The room filled with the rapid whoosh, whoosh, whoosh of a heartbeat. "There's your baby," Dr. Reed said, pointing to a tiny blob on the screen that somehow contained an entire universe of possibility. Eleanor and Steve stared, transfixed. Then Dr. Reed moved the wand slightly and paused. Hold on." Eleanor's heart seized. "What? Is something wrong?" Dr. Reed's face broke into a huge smile. "Nothing's wrong, but there's something you should know." He turned the screen toward them more fully. "Do you hear that?" Eleanor listened. 2 heartbeats, distinct but overlapping, like a syncopated rhythm. "What does that mean?" Steve asked. Dr. Reed laughed. "It means congratulations. You're having twins." The room spun. Eleanor gripped Steve's hand harder. "Twins? Are you sure?" "See these 2 sacks?" Dr. Reed pointed. 2 babies. Fraternal twins, looks like. Both have strong heartbeats. Everything looks healthy and right on track. Eleanor couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. 8 years of nothing. 8 years of being called barren, defective, useless. And now— "Twins," Steve said, his voice full of wonder. He looked at Eleanor. "We're having twins." Eleanor finally found her voice. I spent so long thinking I couldn't. You were never the problem, Dr. Reed said gently. I told you that. Your body has always been capable of this. It just needed the right circumstances. The right circumstances, Eleanor thought. The right partner. The right love. The right life. She looked at Steve, who was still staring at the ultrasound screen like he was witnessing a miracle. And maybe he was. Maybe they both were. If you're crying right now, you're not alone. Drop a "We love you, Eleanor" in the comments. But hold on, because Nathan is about to make the worst decision of his life. You won't want to miss what happens next. Make sure you're subscribed. While Eleanor was glowing with new life across the city in a different high-rise, Nathan Powell was drowning. His penthouse felt too big, too quiet, too much like a mausoleum for the life he'd destroyed. The divorce had been finalized for a year now. Nathan had expected to feel relieved, vindicated, ready to move forward. Instead, he felt hollow. He'd tried dating. God, had he tried. A different woman every few weeks, each one carefully selected to be Eleanor's opposite. Blondes where Eleanor was dark, loud where Eleanor was quiet. Women who talked about themselves constantly, who never asked uncomfortable questions, who were happy to be seen on his arm at charity galas and never wondered if he had a soul underneath the expensive suits. None of them lasted more than a few months. His mother, Patricia, was getting worried. You need to settle down, she'd said over their weekly dinner. You're 43 now, Nathan. Time is running out if you want children. Children. That word had become poison in Nathan's mouth. Because here was the truth Nathan hadn't told anyone. He'd been with 4 different women since the divorce, Maybach+. Each relationship lasting long enough to feel serious, and none of them had gotten pregnant. Not one. At first, he'd blamed bad timing, then bad luck. Then he'd started to wonder, late at night, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, if maybe Eleanor hadn't been the problem after all. But he couldn't face that possibility. Wouldn't face it. Because if Eleanor wasn't the problem, then he'd destroyed his marriage and threw away 8 years with a woman who'd loved him for nothing. He'd caused irreparable harm based on a lie he'd told himself. So he'd pushed the thought away, buried it, pretended everything was fine. Then he'd met Vivian Cross. She was everything Patricia had been asking for. Young, beautiful, from a good family, with an Instagram following and a lifestyle blog that made her recognizable in certain circles. She was 28, blonde, and very clear about wanting children someday. Nathan had been dating Vivian for a year now. They looked perfect together in photos. His business partners approved. His mother practically glowed with hope every time Vivian visited, but they'd been trying to conceive for the past 8 months. Nothing. Vivian had started dropping hints about seeing a fertility specialist. Just to be safe, she'd said lightly, just to make sure everything's working right. Nathan had shut her down immediately. We don't need doctors. It'll happen when it happens. But the truth was, Nathan was terrified. Because if they went to a doctor, if they ran tests, if they discovered that he was the reason for the empty nursery that had haunted 2 relationships now, he couldn't finish the thought. So instead, he'd proposed. A massive engagement ring. A surprise proposal at a Seahawks game on the Jumbotron with 40,000 people watching. Vivian had said yes, squealing and crying and kissing him while the crowd roared approval. The wedding was set for 6 months later. Nathan threw himself into planning with manic energy, determined to make this the event of the season. $2 million budget, 400 guests, historic venue, live band, ice sculptures, flowers imported from Holland. It had to be perfect. It had to prove to everyone, to his mother, to his friends, to himself, that he'd made the right choice, that leaving Eleanor had been the smart move, that his life was better now. But late at night, when Vivian was asleep beside him, Nathan would lie awake and wonder why he still thought about Eleanor, why he still remembered the way she used to make him coffee in the morning, exactly how he liked it, why he could still hear her quiet laugh, why he wondered, sometimes, where she was and if she was okay. One night, unable to sleep, Nathan had done something he'd sworn he wouldn't do. He'd typed Eleanor's name into Google. Eleanor Hayes Interiors was the first result. A clean, professional website showcasing stunning design work. Hotels, restaurants, high-end residential projects. In the About section was a photo of Eleanor, looking somehow more beautiful than Nathan remembered. Her smile bright and genuine in a way it hadn't been in years when she was married to him. Nathan had stared at that photo for a long time. Then he'd seen it. In the bottom corner of the About page, in small text, lead designer, Cascade Luxury Hotels flagship renovation project. Cascade. Steve Forbes' company. Nathan knew Steve Forbes by reputation, self-made billionaire, well-respected in Seattle's business community, appeared regularly on most eligible bachelor lists before Nathan scrolled frantically through news articles until he found it. Seattle billionaire Steve Forbes marries interior designer in intimate ceremony. The article was 4 months old. There was a photo, Eleanor in a cream dress, radiant, laughing, held in the arms of a tall, handsome man who looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Nathan's stomach turned to ice. Eleanor had remarried to a billionaire. She was happy, successful, thriving. And Nathan couldn't stop staring at her face in that photo, at the joy that lit her up from within, joy he'd never seen when she was married to him. That's when the idea formed. A terrible, petty, vindictive idea that Nathan tried to dismiss but couldn't quite shake. He was getting married in a few months. The wedding would be the social event of the season. Everyone who was anyone in Seattle would be there, including, potentially, Eleanor. If he invited her, if she had to sit and watch him marry someone else, someone young and beautiful who could presumably give him everything Eleanor couldn't, wouldn't that prove he'd moved on? Wouldn't it show her that his life was perfect without her? Wouldn't it hurt her the way she'd hurt him by succeeding after he'd thrown her away? Nathan knew it was cruel. He knew it was small, but something bitter had taken root in his heart, something that whispered that Eleanor didn't deserve to be happy when he felt so hollow inside. So one night, after 3 glasses of scotch, Nathan added Eleanor's name to the guest list, front row seat, right where she couldn't miss anything. Tobias had argued with him. "Bro, this is a bad idea. What are you trying to prove?" "Nothing," Nathan had lied. "I'm just being mature, showing there's no hard feelings." But there were hard feelings. Hard, bitter, twisted feelings that had nowhere else to go. The invitation went out. And Nathan Powell, who'd built an empire on making smart decisions, had just made the worst mistake of his life. Nathan just made a fatal error. Drop a "he's going to regret this" in the comments if you know what's coming. Part 3 is going to be insane. The wedding day, the Maybach, the twins, and a public destruction you won't believe. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. Eleanor's pregnancy was textbook perfect. No complications, no scares. Just a steady, miraculous progression as her body did exactly what Nathan had sworn it couldn't do. At 20 weeks, they learned the genders. "1 boy, 1 girl," the ultrasound technician said with a smile. "Your daughter is trying to kick her brother. She's feisty." Steve laughed, his hand squeezing Eleanor's. "Takes after her mother." They named the babies before they were born. Elise Grace, after Steve's grandmother. Elisha James, after Eleanor's grandfather. 2 names that carried love forward from the past into the future. The nursery in Steve's waterfront estate became Eleanor's favorite room. Soft gray walls, white furniture. A rocking chair by the window where Eleanor would sit in the evenings, hands on her growing belly, talking to her children about the world they'd soon enter. "Your father is the kindest man I've ever known," she'd whisper. "And you're going to be so loved, so wanted. I promise you'll never doubt that." Jade visited constantly, bringing baby clothes and unsolicited advice and joy that filled the house like light. "Girl, you're glowing. Like annoyingly glowing. It's disgusting how happy you look." Eleanor laughed. "I feel happy. Is that allowed? Am I allowed to just be happy?" "After everything you've been through," Jade said fiercely, "you're allowed to be happy for the rest of your life." At 37 weeks, on a clear April morning, Eleanor's water broke. The twins were born 6 hours later. Elise first, screaming her arrival with impressive lung power, followed 3 minutes later by Elisha, who entered the world quietly, as if he was still deciding whether this whole outside-the-womb thing was worth the fuss. Steve cut both umbilical cords with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. When the nurse placed the babies on Eleanor's chest, skin to skin, Eleanor felt something inside her click into place. This was what her body had been designed for, not for Nathan's expectations or Patricia's judgment or society's timeline. For this. For these two perfect tiny humans who'd somehow grown from love and hope and second chances. "Hi, babies," Eleanor whispered, kissing Elisa's dark curls and Elisha's smooth forehead. "Hi, I'm your mama, and I've been waiting for you my whole life." Steve leaned down, his arms around all three of them. "We're a family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're really a family." The twins were 2 months old when the invitation arrived. Eleanor was sitting on the living room floor doing tummy time with the babies when Steve walked in from collecting the mail. He held a thick cream envelope, his expression carefully neutral. "Elle," he said quietly, "you got something." Eleanor looked up, immediately catching his tone. "What is it?" Steve handed her the envelope. Her name was written in elegant calligraphy. Ms. Eleanor Hayes, not Eleanor Forbes, her maiden name, as if the past year and a half hadn't happened. Eleanor's stomach dropped. She knew that handwriting. Patricia Powell had addressed their wedding invitations in that same elaborate script. With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened the envelope and pulled out the card. "Nathan Powell and Vivian Cross request the honor of your presence at their marriage, the date, the time, the location, the Powell family estate, the same place where Eleanor had endured countless tense holiday dinners. And at the bottom, in smaller text, front row seating reserved for Ms. Hayes." Eleanor stared at the words until they blurred. Steve knelt beside her. "What is it?" Wordlessly, Eleanor handed him the invitation. Steve read it, his jaw tightening. "He invited you to his wedding." "Front row," Eleanor said hollowly. "He wants me in the front row." "Why would he?" Steve stopped, realization dawning. "He wants to humiliate you. He wants you to sit there and watch him marry someone else." Eleanor felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. "He wants me to see what I lost. He wants me to know he moved on. That he found someone better, someone who can give him what I supposedly couldn't." Steve's expression went from confused to furious in seconds. "That petty, small-minded Eleanor, you're not going. You don't owe him anything. You don't have to subject yourself to his ego." Eleanor looked down at her babies. Elisa was trying to lift her head, her little face scrunched with effort. Elisha was watching his sister with wide, curious eyes. "He doesn't know," Eleanor said softly. "Know what?" "About them. About us." Eleanor looked up at Steve. "He doesn't know I remarried. He doesn't know about the twins. He thinks I'm still the broken woman he threw away." Steve sat back on his heels. "So he invited you thinking you'd show up alone and miserable." "Yay," Eleanor's voice was steady now. "He invited me to prove I was nothing without him. To prove he made the right choice." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the twins' soft coos and the distant crash of waves against the shore. Then Eleanor smiled, a slow, dangerous smile Steve had never seen before. "I want to go," she said. Steve blinked. "What?" "I want to go to his wedding." Eleanor's voice was calm but filled with steel. "Not for revenge, not to cause a scene. But Steve, he needs to see. The world needs to see. I need to see one final time that I survived him." Steve studied her face. "Are you sure?" Eleanor looked at her children, her impossible, miraculous children, then at her husband, who'd given her a love so different from what she'd known before that it felt like learning a new language. "I'm sure," she said, "but I'm not going alone, and I'm not going sad, and we're going to show Nathan Powell exactly what he lost." If you're getting chills right now, drop a queen energy in the comments. The wedding day is coming, and Nathan has no idea what's about to hit him. Don't you dare click away. The morning of Nathan's wedding dawned clear and bright. The kind of perfect Seattle day that happened maybe twice a year. Eleanor stood in her bedroom, their bedroom, hers and Steve's, staring at the gown hanging on the closet door. Jade had helped her select it, a champagne-colored silk creation by a designer whose name Eleanor couldn't pronounce but whose work spoke fluent elegance. The dress had a high neck, long sleeves, and a silhouette that skimmed her post-baby body in a way that suggested grace rather than trying too hard. "You look like royalty," Steve said from the doorway. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that had been tailored within an inch of its life, every line perfect. Eleanor turned to face him. "I'm nervous." "That's allowed." Steve crossed to her and took her hands. "Elle, we can still stay home. We can spend the day with the twins. We can forget Nathan Powell exists." "No." Eleanor shook her head. "I need to close this chapter. I need to walk into that room and realize I feel nothing, that he has no power over me anymore. And if you get there and it's too hard, then you'll take me home," Eleanor said simply. "But I don't think it will be. I think I'll walk in there and realize he's a stranger who once hurt me, and then I'll come home to my real life, to you, to our babies, to everything that matters." Steve kissed her forehead. "You're the strongest person I know." Downstairs, Jade was already with the twins. They'd decided to bring them, not as props or weapons, but simply because Eleanor didn't want to hide any part of her life. Not anymore. Elise wore a tiny cream dress with a bow in her dark curls. Elisha wore a miniature suit that made him look like the world's smallest CEO. They were both awake and calm, as if they understood the gravity of the day. "Oh my God," Jade said when she saw Eleanor in her gown. "Nathan Powell is going to die, like literally expire on the spot." Eleanor laughed despite her nerves. "That's not the goal." "Maybe not your goal," Jade muttered. The Maybach arrived at exactly 2 p.m., a midnight blue Pullman, the kind of vehicle that cost more than most houses. Steve had arranged everything: the driver, the timing, the route that would have them arriving exactly 10 minutes after the ceremony was scheduled to begin. "Why late?" Eleanor had asked when he'd explained the plan. Steve had smiled. "Because you're not showing up desperate and early. You're arriving when you decide to arrive, on your terms, your timeline." As they settled into the Maybach's plush interior, Eleanor, Steve, and the twins in their car seats, Eleanor took a deep breath. "Ready?" Steve asked. Eleanor looked at her children, at her husband, at the life she'd built from the ruins Nathan had left behind. "Ready?" she said. The Powell estate looked exactly as Eleanor remembered, imposing, perfectly manicured, designed to intimidate rather than welcome. The circular driveway was packed with luxury vehicles. Through the open doors of the massive tent erected on the lawn, Eleanor could see hundreds of guests already seated. The ceremony had started. Their Maybach pulled up to the entrance, and Eleanor watched several valets turn to stare. This wasn't just any car. This was the kind of vehicle that announced money in all capital letters. The driver came around and opened the door. Eleanor stepped out first. The conversations near the entrance died immediately. Several women openly gaped. Men straightened in their seats, craning to see who'd arrived. Eleanor stood tall, her champagne gown catching the afternoon light. Then Steve emerged from the car, looking every inch the billionaire he was. But it was what came next that made the whispers explode into full gasps. Steve reached into the car and carefully lifted out Elisha, cradled in his arms. Eleanor reached in for Elise Gissi, settling her daughter against her hip. 2 toddlers. Beautiful, healthy, undeniable. Eleanor walked toward the tent entrance, Steve beside her, their children in their arms. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just moved forward with the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly who she was. Inside the tent, heads turned like dominoes falling. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the rows of guests like wildfire. "Is that Eleanor Hayes? She has children? Who's the man?" "That's Steve Forbes, the Steve Forbes." At the altar, Nathan was mid-vow. He was saying something about commitment, about choosing forever, but his eyes suddenly locked on the entrance. He stopped speaking mid-sentence. Vivian, in her elaborate white gown, turned to see what had distracted him. Her eyes went wide. The pastor cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mr. Powell?" But Nathan wasn't listening. He was staring at Eleanor, at the children in her arms and Steve's arms, at the diamond necklace at her throat that cost more than the entire wedding, at the way she looked, healthy, radiant, whole. Eleanor found her front row seat, exactly where Nathan had placed her. She sat gracefully, Steve beside her. Elise immediately reached for Steve's tie, and he gently redirected her little hands, smiling. Elisha made a soft cooing sound that carried in the sudden silence. The entire wedding party was staring now. Patricia Powell, in the front row across the aisle, had gone pale. Tobias Grant, standing as Nathan's best man, looked like he was witnessing a car crash. "Nathan?" Vivian's voice was sharp with panic. "Nathan, finish your vows." Nathan dragged his eyes back to his bride, but Eleanor could see his hands shaking. He started, then stopped. "I'm sorry, can we take a moment?" The pastor looked thoroughly confused. "Mr. Powell, we're in the middle of the ceremony." "I know, Nathan's eyes drifted back to Eleanor, to the twins. "I need a moment." Vivian followed his gaze, and Eleanor watched realization dawn on the younger woman's face. The way Nathan was looking at his ex-wife, the shock, the devastation, the unmistakable look of a man whose entire reality was crumbling. "Oh my God," Vivian whispered. "You're still in love with her." The microphone caught her words. The entire tent heard. Nathan's face flushed red. "What? No, You invited her here to humiliate her," Vivian said, her voice rising. "But she shows up looking like that, with a billionaire husband and children, and now you can't even finish your vows?" "Vivian, please, let's not—" "How long?" Vivian demanded. "How long have we been trying to have a baby?" Nathan went very still. 8 months, Vivian continued, her voice shaking. 8 months of trying, and you keep telling me it'll happen, that we just need to be patient. But you won't get tested. You won't even consider that maybe— "Don't," Nathan said sharply. "Don't do this here." "Why not?" Tears were streaming down Vivian's face, destroying her perfect makeup. "You brought her here. You made me stand at this altar while you stare at your ex-wife who—" She looked at Eleanor, at the twins. "Oh my God, it was you. It was always you." Eleanor felt Steve's hand find hers under the cover of Elise's dress. Vivian turned back to Nathan, her voice breaking. "You told me she was infertile. You said that's why you divorced her. You made me believe—" Her breath hitched. "But she has twins, which means you lied, which means—" That's when Tobias stepped forward, his face ashen. "I'm sorry," Tobias said, his voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry, but I can't do this anymore." Nathan whirled on his best man. "Tobias, don't—" "He knew," Tobias said to Vivian. 3 years ago, Nathan got tested. The results showed severe oligospermia. His sperm count is less than 5 million per milliliter. Natural conception is nearly impossible without treatment. The tent erupted, gasps, shocked whispers. Someone's phone camera flash went off. "You knew!" Vivian screamed at Nathan. "You knew it was you, and you let me think. You let her think. I didn't know for sure." Nathan tried to defend himself, his face red. "It was just one test. It could have been wrong. You destroyed your marriage based on a lie," Tobias continued, guilt and anger warring in his voice. "I watched you throw Eleanor out. I watched you call her defective, and I said nothing because you were my friend. But I can't watch you do this to another woman. I can't let you ruin Vivian's life the way you ruined Eleanor's." Patricia Powell suddenly stood up. "Nathan, tell me this isn't true." Nathan looked at his mother, and for the first time, Eleanor saw him as he truly was. Small, scared, desperate. "Mother, Tell me you didn't lie." Patricia's voice was ice. "Tell me you didn't let me drive that girl out of our family when you were the problem all along." Nathan said nothing. Patricia's hand went to her mouth. She looked across the aisle at Eleanor, horror dawning in her eyes. "Oh my God, what have we done?" Before anyone could answer, the tent entrance opened again. A man strode in. tall, angry, dressed in jeans and a leather jacket that had no business at a formal wedding. He carried a baby carrier. "Vivian Cross!" the man shouted. Vivian went from red to white in an instant. "Dom, what are you—" "I'm done playing games," the man, Dom, said, marching down the aisle. He lifted the baby carrier. Inside was a sleeping infant, maybe 4 months old. "This is Gianna, our daughter, born 6 months ago." The tent descended into absolute chaos. Nathan staggered backward. "What?" Dom turned to Nathan, fury in his eyes. "She was still with me when she started dating you, got pregnant, panicked, left me for you because she figured she could pass the baby off as yours after the wedding." Vivian was crying hysterically now. "That's not— He's lying." "I have the paternity test," Dom said coldly, pulling a folded paper from his jacket. 99.97% match. She's mine, and Vivian knows it. He turned to the crowd. "I loved her. I wanted to build a life with her, but she wanted money more than she wanted family. So she was going to trap this guy," he gestured at Nathan, "into raising my daughter as his." Nathan collapsed into a chair, his perfect wedding imploding around him. Vivian ran, just grabbed her dress and ran toward the house, sobbing. Dom looked down at the sleeping baby in the carrier, his expression softening. "Come on, Gianna, let's go home." He walked back out the way he'd come. The tent was in complete pandemonium now. Guests were on their phones, posting to social media, recording videos. The string quartet had stopped playing. The officiant had disappeared. Patricia Powell was sitting in her chair, one hand over her mouth, staring at nothing. And Nathan sat alone at the altar in his designer tuxedo, everything he'd built to prove his superiority shattered around him. Drop a karma in the comments if you're living for this. But we're not done yet. Eleanor is about to do something that will change everything. Eleanor stood slowly, handing Elise to Steve. She walked toward the altar with quiet grace, aware that every eye in the tent was on her. Nathan looked up as she approached. Up close, Eleanor could see he'd been crying. His perfect hair was disheveled where he'd run his hands through it. His bow tie was crooked. He looked broken. Eleanor felt nothing but pity. "Eleanor," he whispered. I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," Eleanor replied gently. "Just listen." Nathan nodded, unable to meet her eyes. 8 years ago, you made me believe I was defective," Eleanor said quietly. "You made me carry shame that was never mine to carry. You destroyed my self-worth and threw me away like I was nothing. And for a long time, I believed you. I believed I was broken." Nathan's shoulders shook with silent sobs. "But I wasn't broken," Eleanor continued. "I was just with the wrong person. And the moment I left your life, mine became more beautiful than I'd ever imagined possible." She gestured toward Steve and the twins. "That's my husband. That's my family. I got pregnant with my twins 6 weeks after marrying him. 6 weeks, Nathan. My body was never the problem. My heart was never defective. I was just waiting for someone who deserved them." Nathan looked at her finally, devastation written across his face. "I'm so sorry. God, Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I ruined everything. There was no us," Eleanor said softly. "Not really. You wanted a perfect wife who would give you perfect children and never challenge your perfect image. You didn't want me. You wanted a performance. And when I couldn't perform anymore, you got rid of me." "I was wrong," Nathan choked out. "I was so wrong about everything." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised even herself. "I forgive you." Nathan's head snapped up. "What?" "I forgive you," Eleanor repeated. "Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry your mistakes around anymore. I forgive you so I can finally be completely free." She took a step back. "I hope you get help, Nathan. I hope you face the truth about yourself. I hope you learn that your value isn't in what you can produce or control or display, but that's your journey, not mine." Eleanor turned and walked back to Steve, who stood with their children. She took Elisha from his arms, kissed her son's soft cheek, and smiled at her husband. "Let's go home," she said. They walked out of the tent together. Eleanor, Steve, and the twins. Behind them, Nathan sat alone in the ruins of his perfect wedding, finally understanding what he'd lost. But Eleanor didn't look back. She didn't need to. 6 months later, the Seattle Times ran a feature story 6 months after Nathan Powell's wedding disaster. The headline read, "Eleanor Hayes Forbes, from discarded wife to design icon, how tragedy became triumph." The article featured photos of Eleanor's latest projects: a boutique hotel in San Francisco, a tech campus in Portland, a private residence in Vancouver that Architectural Digest had called revolutionary. It talked about her growing firm, her innovative approach to sustainable luxury, her reputation as one of the most sought-after designers on the West Coast. But the photo that accompanied the article was Eleanor's favorite: her family on the beach. Steve holding Elise, who was laughing at something off camera. Eleanor holding Elisha, who was trying to eat a handful of sand. Everyone barefoot, happy, real. The article's final paragraph read, "When asked what advice she'd give to women going through divorce, Forbes became thoughtful. Your value isn't determined by someone else's ability to see it," she said. "I spent years trying to be enough for someone who couldn't recognize my worth. Now I spend my days building things that matter with people who value what I bring. That's not revenge, that's healing." Eleanor framed that article and hung it in her office, not because she needed the validation, but because she wanted to remember. To remember the woman who'd sat crying in the rain with nowhere to go. To remember that breaking can be the first step toward becoming whole. Nathan saw the article too. He was alone in his penthouse when he read it. The same penthouse that felt even emptier now than it had after Eleanor left. The wedding disaster had been bad. The social media fallout had been worse. But the hardest part was the silence. He'd started therapy, finally gotten treatment for his fertility issues. Slowly, painfully begun the work of understanding why he'd needed to control and blame rather than love and support. He'd written Eleanor letters he never sent. Apologies that could never undo the harm. Confessions that came years too late. He followed her career from a distance, watching her flourish, and felt something he'd never felt before: genuine happiness for someone else's success. She deserved it. She'd always deserved it. Nathan would never love again the way he should have loved Eleanor. That chance was gone. But maybe he could learn to love himself honestly, to face his flaws instead of projecting them onto others. It was a start. Eleanor never thought about Nathan anymore. Not with anger, not with regret, not at all, really, except when someone mentioned the article or when old friends asked whatever happened to him. She was too busy living, designing spaces that made people feel something, raising children who would grow up knowing they were wanted, loving a man who chose her every single day. One evening, as she rocked the twins to sleep, a ritual she still cherished even though they were nearly 2 years old now, Steve came into the nursery. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. Eleanor looked at her sleeping children, then at her husband. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am that Nathan threw me away. Because if he hadn't, I never would have found this. Found you. Found myself." Steve kissed her forehead. "His loss became the world's gain." "No," Eleanor said with a smile. "His loss became my gain. The world just gets to witness it." They stood together in the quiet nursery, watching their children sleep, building a life from love instead of obligation, from truth instead of performance. And Eleanor Hayes Forbes, the woman once called defective, discarded, not enough, finally understood that she had always been exactly who she needed to be. She just needed to get out of her own way long enough to become her. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Drop a comment telling me, what's the most important lesson Eleanor taught you? Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their value isn't determined by someone who couldn't see it. You are enough. You have always been enough.